So if I can't get close to you, I'll settle for the ghost of you. I miss you more than life. And if you can't be next to me, your memory is ecstasy. I'll miss you more than life. I'll miss you more than life.
Hi, welcome to my vlog on placement 6. My placement is at Mountbatten Hospice, which is end of life and palliative care. And the reason I've chosen this is because it's an area of interest that I've had a previous placement in and have felt very settled. And it's an area that I really want to specialise in when I graduate. I also feel that it's really important to provide dignity and compassion and use the humanistic framework when caring for patients who are in their last days, hours, and minutes, just as much as it is for patients who are undergoing active treatment. And from this placement, I hope to be able to develop my communication skills, develop my practical skills, for example, drawing up liquid medicines, administering medicines, and also spending time with my patients and families and engaging in difficult conversations, and hopefully, as a result, promoting good care for patients at the end of their life, which is an area I feel is very undervalued. I feel like end of life care and palliative care is my strength. It will be interesting though, having had experience with end of life care, to actually be also treating palliation, so treating patients who are still for active treatment as well as those who are not. So it will really hopefully broaden the scope of what I'm learning, and I hope to gain a lot from that. The model I have chosen to reflect with is Gibbs. This encompasses 6 different areas or stages. I will be doing 1 and 2 together, which is description and thoughts and feelings, because they're very similar. The 3rd stage is evaluation, so what was good or bad about the situation. The 4th stage is to think about what else can be made from the situation, to analyse the situation. And then to conclude is section 5, what else could I have done or not have done? And the last stage is action plan. So what could I do in the future to make this better? The reason I've chosen Gibbs over other models such as Rolf's is because I feel it allows for a more in-depth analysis, which I feel is important for end-of-life care, because it allows you to look more closely at each of the areas to analyse in more detail what went well, what didn't, why, and what we can do about it. Whereas Rolf's, for example, I found that now what, so what and now what? I'm thinking, well, what? It's quite broad, it's quite vague, whereas Gibbs, having description, feelings, evaluation, analysis, conclusion, is a lot more streamlined and appropriate for what can be very difficult care in end of life care, and allows us to really get down to what we can do better. I will also be referring to my patients with a pseudonym, so not by name, and this is to promote confidentiality. This is found in section 5 of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, and also can be found in section 5.3, because it still applies after our patients have died, which is the case for all my patients, unfortunately, in this reflection. I will be reflecting first on a gentleman who I will refer to as Bob. Bob's case is very sad. He came into the hospice the same day he died, and we were called in because he had suddenly started vomiting, fecal vomiting. He unfortunately was suffering from complete obstruction of the bowel due to metastases of cancer, and by 6 p.m. that day it had resulted in the fecal vomiting becoming not only more profuse but projectile. For the last 40 minutes of his life, all we could do was really hold his head up, hold his hand, and just be with him whilst essentially he drowned, aspirated on his own feces. And I have to say, it was one of the most devastating things I've ever seen. That was a thing, wasn't it? And I just wish I could have taken it away from him. When thinking about what was good and bad about the situation, it's pretty obvious to say it was a tragic situation. Not much more to say about that. However, there were some really good things that we did, and that we can really, really be proud of. For example, I looked at the Palliative and End-of-Life Care Statutory Guidelines, which came from the Integrated Care Board on the 29th of September 2022. So under the CRAP test, they're up to date and relevant, which is great. And within that is Ambition 5, which is being prepared to care. And I think this relates quite nicely to some of the NMC and, for example, section 1.1. So practicing with kindness, respect and compassion. And also the NMC section 3.2, responding compassionately to people within their last days and hours. How did we do this? So we stroked his hair, we held his hand because he was a really tactile gentleman. We put his favourite songs on the radio, and we talked to him. We relayed, messages from his loved ones who luckily were not there to see that. And this was really the epitome of dignified and respectful practice. And I felt, despite how horrendous it was, that was such a magical moment, being able to do that for him. And that compassion, that communication, and that kindness and respect should just come naturally. And I'm so proud that it did. And I hope that I will be able to carry that forwards with every single patient I come across. Analysis, conclusion, really, what could I make of the situation? Well, I genuinely believe there was more I could have done. And at the same time, I felt helpless, because what can you do? Somebody is literally choking to death on their own feces, and he's had every PRN there is. He's got phenobarbital up, and it's irreversible, really. So realistically, I had to accept that was it. But I do feel I could potentially, I can't personally yet, but maybe he could have been suctioned. And could that have been an option? When questioning whether suctioning would have been ethical, appropriate, I looked at some really interesting information, and I looked at a lot of journals from Beecham and Childress, and I came across one in particular from 2019 in the Taylor and Francis journals, making its 40th anniversary, The Principles of Bioethics, which will be referenced. And here it's endorsed by other studies such as Chiraghi et al. 2024. And it basically questions the levelling up of beneficence and maleficence. So you need to do the best you can, but you should not go into a realm where you are doing harm. And when analysing this with Bob, we would have been doing more harm than good. The risks would have outweighed the benefits, because yes, he was dying, actively dying anyway. However, he was aspirating solid particles as well as liquid. It was projectile, and not only therefore would it have been pretty pointless, it could have ruptured his esophagus. He was aware of what was going on, so it would have made him a damn sight more uncomfortable. And it wouldn't have been practical or effective. It wouldn't have made sure that under the NMC we were practicing effectively. And as stated by Bonner, 2007, non-maleficence can be provided through providing adequate pain relief through procedures instead. So actually using the phenobarbital, using the copious amounts of morphine we did were, yes, they weren't wholly effective, but actually it was the best under the circumstances we could have done without overstepping the boundary into doing more harm than good. What would I do next time for the action plan? Wow, that's a question. Step in with PRN quicker. He was given pretty much everything that was prescribed, but potentially could we have gone to the doctors quicker and said, look, is there anything else you can prescribe to make him less aware of what was going on? It's not ethical to knock somebody out in that respect, but if we had stepped in earlier, maybe sought some extra PRN, then potentially it could have mitigated him being aware of what was going on. So I think next time I would potentially go to the doctors myself and just say, look, this is the situation, what can we do? The doctors were on hand as it was happening, so that's definitely something for next time, is to not be afraid of my student status and just say, look, what can we do? Can we give him something else? And question. I think not being afraid to question practice is definitely something to take with me in the future. The next reflection I will be doing is a young 38-year-old lady who had a malignant necrotic tumour to her cervix. It had metastasized to her lymph nodes and grew very rapidly in a 3-month period. It partially obstructed her bowel and it invaded the lower uterus, the upper vagina, her bladder, her rectum and her presacral space. The reason I've chosen her for my reflection is because on a previous placement I was with the palliative care team as part of a spoke day, and I was called to the ward where she was after she'd had her scans and her diagnosis merely 3.5 months ago, where they found the stage 4 necrotic tumour, and I've been with her for her journey until today, the day she died. So it's quite a poignant reflection to do. It is tears all round because our little 38-year-old lady has just died, and although it never changes how much I love this job and this is where I want to specialise, this is what I want to do, it's not changing my mind, life is just so damn cruel. Because this lady's case is so complex, the area that I will be reflecting upon using the Gibbs cycle is her medication, because, yeah, she just wouldn't behave herself. She would go out with her TTOs, so things like Oromorph, ketamine, and she would not take it. And she would come back in such a state, in so much pain. And that's basically what I'm going to talk about. So for the evaluation and analysis, I'll do the two together in this case, because what was good and what was bad kind of needs to be analysed with what was going on, because she was just so complex. We have one prominent area of law is the Mental Capacity Act 2005. Part of that is that our patients do have the ability to make a silly decision, and this is also represented in other areas of case law, in studies, and some of those that I've also looked at here kind of endorse that principle. And one of these is McFarland et al. 2024. In this study, there were patients who didn't have capacity. However, Our Lady very much did. And as emphasised by Johnstone and Liddell 2007, unwise decisions do not by default render the patient to be lacking capacity. So these should be respected. So it was a silly decision to not take her TTOs whenever she went out, and she knew time and time again what would happen if she didn't do it. And it happened time and time again. She was writhing around in agony. However, that was her decision, and we had to respect that. Now, that was good because we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. We were upholding the principles that we need to act by. However, it was bad because we had to let her make those unwise decisions. It was causing her pain, but we had no choice, really. We just had to watch her do that to herself, despite telling her to the contrary. It was causing her partner to struggle quite a lot, having to see her like that. And he would shout at her, she would lose her rag, and he was in and out like a yo-yo because it was just too much for him to tolerate, being yelled at when she was in so much pain. But on the other hand, she said to me, it's the last thing I've got in my life that I can control. And this was so poignant because she felt like she had nothing left. So yes, we had to respect that decision. There were some good things about the situation, despite the pain that she was going through, and she suffered so badly for so long. But when she did come back and she was in that state, we acted really quickly. So we practiced effectively under the NMC. We were on top of the pain relief. We got to know what her character was like, how she would react, what sort of a mood she was in. And we were able to get the right combination of pain relief. And also when that became ineffective, we were then able to titrate it up and get it changed to match what she needed. When her EGFR rate came through on the 24th, and it was 10, and I thought, this is coming to the end. And then we were able to change her medication accordingly because we could no longer give her morphine because it would build up toxicity. So we had to change to fentanyl. Wasn't strong enough. In the end, phenobarbital all the way. And we were able to get that bang, bang, bang when we needed it to rectify the situation. So even though it was her choice, that was another good thing about the situation, is we were able to almost predict what was going to happen, and we were able to deal with it and alleviate the pain that she was in. In conclusion, what else could have been done? I looked at the Future Nurse Standards and found section 4.2 to work in partnership with people and encourage shared decision making, or supporting individuals, families, carers to manage their own care where appropriate. And this is endorsed by previous studies. So, for example, Brown et al. 2016 noted this quite significantly. And this was before the Future Nurse Standards was created. It highlighted the need to take the time to explain to patients the importance of what you're doing, the importance of their care, the importance of medication adherence specifically in this study, and the purpose of the medicines, the function, and the consequences of not taking them versus taking them. And in conclusion, I think that's what we could have done. And with the action plan, actually following that is what I would do in the future. I would make sure I would take the time to sit down with patients like this young lady. And we did tell her, you need to take the medication. But I feel in retrospect, we could have sat down with her and said, look, this is exactly, she knew what it was, mostly pain relief. But we could have said, this is its purpose. This is why you need to take it at this time, because you've got some that are fast acting, some that are long acting. It's a lot of it is kind of built up in the system. This is why you're on that one, because of toxicity, and your kidneys can't excrete what the old medication would have been. This is what will happen if you don't take it, and you need to take the responsibility for that. And I think that is something I will definitely be doing in the future, because even though it's still under the Mental Capacity Act and under the principles of things like Johnstone and Liddell, and other areas such as Oswald et al. 2023, it would have still been her decision. She could still make that daft decision. However, we could have done more to mitigate that, and hopefully in the future I can take that forwards to maybe prevent other people from making such a silly decision, or encourage them to think about the decisions that they're making. So for the final reflection, I thought actually it might be nice to do something a little bit different, still using Gibbs's model of reflection, but using maybe the latter stages due to the time constraints of this assessment. I thought it'd be interesting to look at staff's mental well-being. So look at what policies and studies there are on staff's mental well-being and compare what we do at the hospice and whether it was good, bad, and how effective it was, and in conclusion whether there was anything we could do in the future to potentially improve upon that. I looked at platform 6.1, specifically 6.11 of the Future Nurse Standards, and it talks a lot about developing resilience as a nurse, and that is very important. It's very important, especially in the hospice, because we are dealing with such delicate situations. We're dealing with emotions, we're dealing with death, we're dealing with the aftermath of death, we're dealing with people who know their life is coming to an end. We are dealing with family who are grieving before they even have to grieve because we know what the outcome is eventually going to be. We're dealing with people in pain. So it is important to be very resilient. However, how do we be resilient and care for our well-being at the same time? And there's a study that was really interesting that was published by the government, so the UK Parliament report on the 8th of June 2021, so it's still quite recent. And it states basically that an overhaul is needed because we need to tackle workforce burnout because we're all being too resilient. We are just putting our own needs last, and in a delicate environment we need to get more of a balance. And the lady who stated this is the CBE of the NMC herself, Andrea Sutcliffe, at the time. And it's endorsed by many other studies. So we have Monroe and Hope of 2022, which says organisations must have better systemic support to build that resilience. It shouldn't be down to the nurse alone to build their own resilience. So what should trusts or organisations do to do that? So to do this, there are various guidelines and reports. One interesting one is the NICE guidelines from the 2nd of March 2022, which is NG 212, and it talks specifically about how organisations can establish a supportive environment, especially psychologically, for their staff, and this is mentioned in section 1.21. So you need good leadership, you need good peer support, and under section 1.22, workplaces need to develop processes to implement that support, such as things like private spaces to chat, and access to wellbeing groups, classes, and mindfulness, and this is mentioned in section 1.64. So what do we do at the hospice in relation to those policies, and is it any good? So really, we do a lot of those things, and I got to experience a lot of those things. For example, we have structured reflections which are planned out, and with our 38-year-old lady, because it was a really profound loss, actually there was an hour-long structured reflection that had been planned with the whole of the MDT involved. Everyone got to sort of talk through if they were feeling anything, if they wanted to say anything, and that was really, really good example of practicing this. And also under section 1.21 and the chat spaces 1.23, the head nurse actually took me aside just on a whim and said, hey, I haven't seen you today, I've been off for a few days, how are you since died? And we had a little chat, and just a little one-to-one chat, and I was fine. I'm quite, seem to be made of tough stuff in this environment, and it was really useful. The only downside is that I think if somebody wasn't very used to it, or maybe a student who felt that they needed to, who was struggling maybe and didn't want to admit to it, you kind of have to say, yeah, I'm great. So for me it wasn't a problem, but maybe when you're put on the spot it could be a problem for some people. I think the way to counteract that is just to be open and honest and just say, yeah,
I am having a bit of a hard time with that. We also have a lovely lady from chaplaincy, so even if you're not religious, there's space to talk. So section 1.23 again is there in abundance. You can have that structured time, you can have that unplanned time if you want it. It's really good because these options all bring us together as colleagues and friends and help us sort through our feelings, which again in turn, yes, we need to be less focused on resilience as individuals, but actually by having a systemic manner of building resilience, actually it helps us as individuals build our resilience. So we are also technically adhering to the Future Nurse Standards to develop that in our practice, and that's something that I'm definitely taking with me as time goes on. Other examples of things that we have in place, especially under section 1.64, are the group activities. So we have, I will insert some images as I'm yammering at you, that we have various activities that are scheduled throughout the week. Some of them are for patients, some are for staff, some are for a mixture of patients and staff. We have various events such as ribbon tying, so memorial events, and we are permitted ourselves to attend memorial services that we have once a week, should we wish to. And we also have different activities that are brought to us as well. So for example, one of the very well-known ice cream vans on the island has an affiliation with us and brings us some goodies. So we often have, little events to kind of break up the day, and we are allowed to utilize them as we feel. And that is really good because, again, we can get a sense of closure from these events as well. For example, if it's the ribbon tying and we tie a ribbon for somebody one of our patients that we've lost, or even a member of our own family that we may have lost in the past. But the disadvantage is that actually, on the whole, we don't get time to do those structured events.
So when thinking about what could be done better to make staff have better access to wellbeing, there's probably a few things that could be done. It is difficult generally because of time, the fact that we're always busy. However, for example, maybe repeat classes throughout the week in groups. So if you can't make one, you could make another. Maybe implement things that change over time, so you can either do it before or after a shift. And also advertise them better, because I noticed that I didn't realise there were these groups until I actually asked what options there were for wellbeing. So that might be useful to make them more readily available and advertise that fact. And also maybe consider an external portal which can be accessible to staff wellbeing maybe out of hours. So if somebody's struggling out of hours, then they've got somebody to talk to then. So in conclusion, overall, when thinking about what I've learned and what I'll be taking with me into future practice, there's a lot of things. For example, I will be hoping to gain a lot more confidence, especially in challenging or questioning any treatment when I believe that an alternative may be in the patient's best interests and I can justify why that is. I hope to continue to learn how to benefit balance and risks of treatment, and when we may be stepping from beneficence into maleficence, and be able to make an effective and professional choice in respect to that dilemma. And I hope to be able to keep a lot of compassion in my heart, because that's one thing I feel that I can do, and keep it at the forefront of my practice as stipulated by Platform 6 of the Future Nurse Standard. Thank you for taking the time to watch this P6 reflection video. Any references that have been used will be uploaded separately to Canvas, and as I've had so many ridiculous outtakes and bodged up so much of it, I will probably be making a confidential video, YouTube video, with my outtakes, because they are so copious in quantity and quite ridiculous. So overall, thank you again. And thank you, Mountbatten, and see you back at uni.
So if I can't get close to you, I'll settle for the ghost of you. I miss you more than life. And if you can't